Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out that you have to give away half your lunch every single day forever.
And if you don't, you get punished.
Now imagine that the person taking your lunch also decides when you can get married, where you can live, and even what forest you're allowed to walk in.
That was real life for millions of farmers about 500 years ago in a place called the Holy Roman Empire. And in 1525, something unbelievable happened. Farmers, regular people with muddy boots and farm tools, decided they were done.
They stood up against one of the most powerful empires in the world.
And for a short, shocking moment, they almost won.
But to understand how, we need to go back. First, the Holy Roman Empire wasn't like one big country with one strong ruler. It was more like a giant puzzle made of hundreds of tiny pieces. Each piece was ruled by a different prince, duke, or church leader.
There was an emperor named Charles V, but he didn't control everything directly. Most power was in the hands of local lords. And these lords controlled almost every part of a farmer's life.
Most farmers didn't own their land. They worked on land that belonged to a lord. In return, they had to give him crops, money, and free labor days. If they wanted to grind grain at a mill, they had to use the lord's mill and pay for it. If they wanted to hunt deer to feed their family, that was illegal unless the lord allowed it. Even getting married could require permission.
It was like living in a world where someone else made every rule, and the rules kept getting worse. Around the early 1500s, things became even harder. Food prices were rising. Some harvests were bad. Lords wanted more money to pay for fancy lifestyles and wars, so they raised taxes and demanded more work.
Farmers were frustrated, angry, and tired of feeling powerless. Then came an idea that changed everything. In 1517, a man named Martin Luther spoke out against problems in the Catholic Church. He said church leaders were being greedy and unfair. His ideas spread quickly because of the printing press, which worked like an early copy machine. One of Luther's biggest messages was that all people are equal in the eyes of God. Now pause and think about that. If everyone is equal in God's eyes, why are some people treated like masters and others like property? Farmers began asking that exact question.
Soon, small protests started in southern Germany. At first, they were simple. Farmers refused to accept new rules. They complained about unfair taxes.
But this time was different. They didn't just shout. They organized.
Villages formed groups. They chose leaders. They even created written lists of what they wanted changed. In 1525, they published something called the 12 Articles.
This was a big deal. It was one of the first times in European history that regular people wrote down a list of rights they believed they deserved. They asked for things like choosing their own church leaders, lowering unfair taxes, fair treatment in courts, and the right to hunt and fish for food. They weren't asking to become kings. They were asking for fairness.
And thousands of copies of this document spread across the region. More and more farmers joined the movement.
At its peak, nearly 300,000 peasants were involved. That's like filling multiple giant sports stadiums. Some groups had 10,000 fighters. And here's where things got intense. Some farmers attacked castles, others took over towns. Monasteries were looted. For a short time, it seemed like the old system was cracking.
Imagine being a noble and hearing that thousands of angry farmers were marching toward your castle.
Many nobles panicked.
But here's the problem. The farmers were brave, but they weren't trained soldiers. They had pitchforks, axes, and farm tools. The princes had professional armies with swords, guns, armor, and horses. Another big problem, the farmers didn't all agree on what they wanted. Some wanted peaceful reforms. Others, like a preacher named Thomas Müntzer, believed this was the moment to completely destroy the old system. He gave fiery speeches, saying God would protect them. That made some farmers feel unstoppable. But believing you're protected isn't the same as being prepared. Meanwhile, the princes did something smart. Even though they often fought each other, they decided to unite against the peasants. They saw the rebellion as a threat to all of them. In May 1525, thousands of peasants gathered near a town called Frankenhausen. They believed they could win. The prince's army arrived with cannons. The battle didn't last long. Cannons fired into the peasant lines. Trained soldiers attacked. The farmers couldn't defend themselves properly. In just hours, thousands were killed. Thomas Müntzer was captured and later executed. And this wasn't the only battle. Across German lands, peasant armies were defeated again and again. By the end of the war, around 100,000 peasants had died. It was one of the bloodiest uprisings in European history. Even Martin Luther, whose ideas had inspired many farmers, turned against them when the violence grew. He feared chaos more than unfairness. He told the princes to restore order. In the end, the rebellion was crushed. The lords stayed in power. And in some places, rules became even stricter. So did the peasants fail? In the short term, yes. They lost the war. But something important had changed. For the first time on a huge scale, ordinary people had stood together and demanded written rights. They showed that peasants weren't just silent workers. They could organize, publish ideas, and challenge powerful rulers. The 12 Articles didn't disappear. The idea that regular people deserve fairness didn't disappear. Centuries later, other revolutions would use similar ideas, that people have rights, that rulers should be fair, that power can be questioned. The farmers of 1525 didn't win their battles, but they planted a seed.